Welcome back to Open Line. We were talking about the mayor's race, the recent mayoral debate, and an upcoming poll by News Channel 5. We have with us Berje Yacoubian with Yacoubian Research and Pat Nolan, our political analyst. I hinted as we went to break that we had some clue as to at least some of the numbers at this point. What are you prepared to say at this point as far as what you're seeing in these early sort of numbers as you begin to look at this data?
The early data out of roughly 5,000 respondents indicates that after the debate, after the News Channel 5 Yacoubian, or actually News Channel 5 debate, the margin increased between the candidates. In other words, one candidate's lead increased over the other after the debate than it had before.
And this is before you've weighted the other.
That's correct. This is before the weighting, and by all indications, it looks like after the weighting, it might actually increase rather than decrease.
And the difference in weighting is going to make what kind of difference in the numbers? Not necessarily a huge difference in terms of the overall numbers. Some kind of margin of about 4 or 5%, you said?
It may make as much as 5%. Yeah. Partly because some of these numbers are skewed. For example, I don't know if you want to go into these about who voted and who didn't.
Let's go. Yeah, I think that's interesting. The voter profile from August 6th. Who exactly turned out? And we have a graphic, but people 18 to 34 years old. That makes up 25% of current registered voters.
That's correct.
But they didn't turn out.
No.
In the they weren't voting for mayor.
They were only 11% of the turnout.
Right.
11%.
About half what they were in the overall registered.
But a factor of 2.3 to 1.
So there you see, age group 18 to 34 of all registered voters that make up 25%, a fourth. But on August 6th, 11%. They made up only 11%.
Okay, I'll say it. It was the old folks that voted. Hey, you're above 50. You can see what
older, Pat.
Older, yes.
Older.
You can see that was well over. That was 68%. Over almost over 2/3 of the voters that turned out election day were above 50 years of age.
So is that surprising? When you look at those numbers, what do you think of that? And Pat, both of you can take that. Bears, you start.
Yeah. Generally, if one candidate is younger running against older person, you would expect that younger people to turn out in support of that candidate. But there's really not that much age difference here. What there is a difference in, and we'll talk about this next week, is that there is a correlation between age and ideology. Okay? And there is a correlation between age and political party. There's a correlation between age and ideology and political party. So when you combine those factors, you see that the younger the voters are, the more likely one candidate is going to benefit more than the others. We won't go into which one today because we still have to, as I said earlier, use 40 different weights to adjust this data to make it resemble more of the runoff picture than it does now. But suffice it to say that those over 50 basically made about half the population, whereas 68% of all the August voters were over 50. So this proportionate number of older people voted in early August. Now, is that going to be the same thing? Generally, yes, because I may have mentioned this earlier in the 2007 election, where I was actually working for one of the candidates. We basically found out that most of the voters who voted in the runoff were the same voters who had voted earlier. We had roughly 133,000 people voting in the runoff, and we have quite a way to go for this one. We only had 104,000, so in the 2007 election, the turnout was just about the same. There was not much difference.
Yeah, and what we know at this point is that in early voting this time, we're running slightly ahead. Now, we've only been able to vote at Howard School. Tomorrow, that will change when the 11 satellite centers turn out. But it looks like at this point, based on what's happened at Howard School, that we're up slightly. We did 104,000. Excuse me, we did 54,000 early voting back in July, August. So it looks like right now, if that continues in the satellite, we'll have a larger, at least early vote. Now, again, remember, it rained election day, so at least in the morning, so that always impacts turnout. So assuming we don't have a bad election day in terms of weather, and we do about the same, then we might be able to go above 104 that we did last time.
Now, Pat, I'm going to ask you, you've covered many elections. You look at this, 68% above the age of 50, 35% above the age of 65. That's who's voting in these elections.
Well, in this election, yes. And
that's who's voting.
You might have a slightly different demographic. You went back and looked at those numbers, say, in the 2008 or 2012 vote in this county for Barack Obama.
For a president.
You might have seen, you certainly would see other demographics in here change. You might see particularly some of the turnouts and some of the, we've got some turnout. You've got turnouts by region in the county too. That was particularly interesting because what we've talked about before about people winning elections in Nashville, south and west of the river, really sticks out in these numbers.
Well, so and we'll get into that. But when you get into turnout, and we don't have high turnout for mayoral races.
No, we don't.
That's just the bottom line. And those that do turn out tend to be older. You look at the two candidates now, who does that benefit in your opinion? Does it benefit either one of them?
Well, I can tell you during the early voting, one of the concerns that was expressed to me by the Berje campaign was that younger people were not voting. I think they feel if the more younger people turn out, the better they're going to be now, it's their total numbers. Now, having said that, she also won the early vote, so she did better than maybe they anticipated, even with an older electorate. So they certainly would love to duplicate what they did in the early vote because it was the early vote that made her first in the runoff, and because neither Bill Freeman nor David Fox could catch her on election day to go into the first place for that. Now, first place didn't win it this time, but at least got you one of the two tickets in the runoff. It was enough for Fox to get in because Bill Freeman did for him quite poorly in the early vote, and while he won the most votes election day, it wasn't enough to make up that gap to either get past Fox or get past Berje.
And then let's do the breakdown for voters by area. All registered voters and then those who voted in August 6th. I think we have a graphic there. What kind of stands out for you as you look over that information, Berje?
Basically, it's southwestern part of the county, which has 28% of all registered voters. It represented 36% of August 6 voters. So a difference of about 8%, which is significant.
Turnout. It's
very
a huge
high
turnout.
As opposed to southeastern
or almost flat from where they were.
Southeastern was actually below where it should have been. So higher turnout on southwestern part of the county and somewhat lower turnout on the southeastern part. And there is a correlation, by the way, about candidate strength versus by region. Well, we'll get to that next week as well.
We won't know this until after the election in September, but we do have council runoff elections going on as well, although out of the 35 council districts, only 9 of them have runoff elections. That will tend to be a little bit of a, if you don't have a runoff election for the council, then you only have the mayor's race and the at-large race to turn out voters, and that will tend to be a little bit of a downer for turnout because of that. It's interesting to note that of the 9 runoff elections for the council, 4 of them are right above north of the river in areas primarily that have precincts that have been African American. What impact will that have, even if it's marginal, on black turnout?
Okay, let's start taking some calls here. Let's go to Jay. Hello, Jay.
Hey, I'll be quick. Thanks for the call. I just got a question for Mr. Nolan. How much endorsements are involved in all this? I mean, I know Bredesen did Berje, and you know the Federal Order of Police is with Fox, and I know Mr. Freeman had the fire department supporting him. But how does that all get into all this? Like, I mean, will the fire department pick another candidate? And also, how much outside money is involved in this campaign? Thanks.
Well, the firefighters have picked another candidate. Last week they endorsed Megan Berje. Today, Senator Doug Henry, longtime conservative Democratic state senator from this area, endorsed Fox. So, I mean, as you get into these, a lot more. It's interesting. There have probably been more endorsements since the August election than there were the entire time before that. All of the local city unions have endorsed Berje except for the police. Police did not, and they actually had a membership vote according to their leadership and according to Fox, and they voted 2-for-1 for Fox. It's interesting that they decided to go a different direction on that, and it'll be interesting to see how that works out. We won't know for sure kind of how those endorsements work out. Obviously, the endorsement by Megan Berje they thought was huge for them. They're running a TV ad right now with Bredesen saying that. And Megan Berje is still making a big deal out of the Tennessean endorsement. They've made a big deal out of that from the time it was issued. They did it in every TV ad that's run since then. It's still in the ads right now. So they think those 2 endorsements are the big ones for them because they're talking about them.
And then the question comes, how much historically have endorsements mattered? And that is a tougher one to answer.
That's a hard one to answer. I will say that there is at least one political race in mayoral history going back to 1966, the first time Beverly Briley was seeking re-election. He had to run against Ben West, who was the last mayor of the old city of Nashville. West didn't seek to become the first Metro mayor, but he did come back in '66 and try to do that. And George Cate, who was the vice mayor, was the third candidate in that race. After that race was over and Cate finished third, he endorsed Beverly Briley, and a lot of people think that was a key factor. I will tell you, our old colleague Chris Clark was covering that race, and he used to talk about how he got the scoop on that and how important that was. And
great.
I used to tease him that happened when I was a sophomore in high school.
That's great. All right, that's great. Let's go to David. Hello, David.
Yes.
Hi, what's on your mind?
Okay, the money borrowed out of the rainy day fund the last 2 years, would we have had to had a balanced budget for Moody to keep our rating up? And also, she just backed a person that wanted on the fair board that wants to tear down the Speedway. Are we going to be faced with this confrontation again about the fairgrounds? Thank you.
There are two endorsements that came down from fairgrounds folks, one from the vendors, one from those that fought to save the fairgrounds. Fairgrounds playing a role in the race.
I would only point out to the caller's concern about it, are we going to see another replay of that? I don't think so, in part because, as you'll recall, voters also adopted an amendment to the Metro Charter that basically makes any kind of radical change to the fairgrounds, including, I would assume, tearing down the raceway, subject to approval by the voters. I mean, it's not going to be something that can be done easily. The council can't just decide to go do it. Obviously, that's an issue, particularly out in that area, that's been very hot across the city. And obviously, one of those groups endorsed David Fox in large part because of Megan Berry's votes on the fairground when Carl Bean was trying to make the changes out there. The other group, which is made up of the vendors, was interesting. It certainly gives Megan Berry something to talk about. She is now saying she is open to talking about ways to spend more money to revitalize the current uses at the fairground. So it will be there. And as far as the use on the rainy day fund,
that was a major question in the debate, and it really got the two of them going after each other.
It's not, that number is a fairly large number, but almost every year I've ever seen a Metro budget, they have taken money out of that contingency fund to help balance the budget, or to spend, or to give them more money to do things in the operating budget. It is a consideration, I would say, that the bond rating houses look at, but by far not the only one they look at in deciding what a bond rating is. And we've had some of the bond houses raise questions about things that we're doing, but on the whole, we still have a strong AA rating. That our rating has not been downgraded across the board at this point. We still be able to sell bonds where we want to sell them, and I don't think that part is necessary. I can understand the concerns about that. I'd also point out that David Fox talked about that, about how astonished he was and surprised about it, but I don't remember him saying anything about it during the campaign. And this decision by the council to spend that $75 million out of the rainy day fund came in May and June during the campaign, and he did not say anything about it at that time. Suddenly it's an issue. It
isn't. All right, we're going to take a break. If you want to call, there's the number. We'll get back and look at some more of the numbers from August 6th. Take a break. Be back right after this.